Sonia Emery, and I'm liaison librarian for the School of Media and Communications. My guest today is Nicholas Glean, who is senior lecturer in video and new media. And so thanks very much for coming to talk to me today about reading at university and beyond. We've had this conversation in sort of an ongoing way, but I was just hoping you could talk maybe a little bit about what you see the role is, the importance of reading in the subjects that you teach.
I think there's a real difficulty now because I like reading because I like the actual experience of holding the book, and I like the collection of the book, and I like the books around me. But if I look at people like my son who argue with me all the time about books, who will read mostly on the phone, and they'll read shorter snippets and shorter areas, so they won't kind of digress across to reading. So reading has really changed. I've tended to find in higher education itself, students don't read. They don't feel they need to. In film in particular, they don't feel they need to read. In
like film study or in the practical?
In practical.
Yeah, film production. And,
yes, so in terms of making films, they don't feel they need to read anything around making films or other people's opinions about films. In fact, they don't feel they need to watch films. They feel films is kind of this thing that's already there, which is ingrained within them, and that they should automatically know and create interesting things. And what we're here to do is just kind of get out their way and provide them with the equipment to kind of do it.
And what would you say to them to tell them why they need to read or why they need to watch? What role does that play in education and becoming a filmmaker?
The problem with education is that it is education. It's vocational education, which always seems to go for a medium. So you're always pitching around, unfortunately, the assessment. And the assessment is always assessed where a whole bunch of people always end up in the middle, and a few exception at the top and a few exception at the bottom. But because that happens within film, film is a craft. So it's a series of skills that you learn, you dedicate yourself to over a period of time, and you learn it. You don't have to go on a media course or a film course in order to be a filmmaker. I was at a conference about last weekend, and there was a young woman who started as a PA, then got invited somehow onto Holby City, and then from there she became a first AC, and then that's probably going to become a camera operator and a DOP. Now, what is her background in terms of framing, composition, the arts, etc.? There isn't any. You know, and particularly if she came from a science, or I think she came from a geography background, so she's going to have to learn that at a certain point in time. Unfortunately, the industry expects you to already know. So she'll copy, and if she's got a good mentor in terms of a DOP, that's great, because that DOP can then open the world for her to go and read and study and learn and all that type of stuff. Otherwise, no, she'll just copy what's out there, and you begin to see that a lot at the moment. People are just tending to copy certain kinds of styles and certain kinds of looks and kind of perpetuating it. So reading in that regard is wonderful, because reading can allow you to just go straight across, so look at from painting to photography to psychology to sociology, because all these things are exceptionally important in trying to understand human beings in order for us to kind of dramatize human beings.
It's interesting what you say about understanding, you know, sort of psychological drama and understanding others beyond your own experience, and I think that's one of the great arguments for reading novels. And reading, you know, that you can portray or reflect an actual world to you, that you can actually understand another's experience. I think is one of the best ways, honestly, is reading a novel, immersing yourself in another person's world. That's actually a great argument for reading too, for them to gain that experience for us all. But you know, particularly a filmmaker.
I do agree with you. I think that's wonderful. But I'm terrible. I don't read novels. I'm really bad.
Really?
I really don't read novels. It takes me about a year or two to read a novel. I just get bored.
Because I see you in here all the time reading.
Yeah, I'm reading.
What do you like to read?
I like to read everything.
Yeah.
I'll read right across. You'll notice everything I order is just like, why? What's going on?
I can tell you've got a new interest by what orders you put through.
So there's human behavior. I really like human behavior. At the moment, I'm looking at gesture, physical gesture.
Really?
And I've just bought a whole bunch of books by Dr. Gabor Mate about psychological trauma and memory.
And how does that translate to gesture?
Well, basically acting, physical gestures that we do, okay, but also the trauma, because had a couple of students in the library, they're writing something, young man's writing something, the plot's good, but there's still a problem with it, and that's because it's the intention of the character. So you begin to ask the question, well, what is the intention of the character? What does the character tend to do? And every book will tell you, well, the character is this, or its actions, or know the inner and outer feeling of the character when you write it. Okay, but that has to relate to people. Okay, so you have to build on your own experience, or you're building on a cinematic experience, and depending who you're following. Okay, so what does it mean to be in a relationship where you don't like the other person, but you're still in it?
Yeah.
What does it mean to feel guilty about your association with your brother or your sister, but still love them? What is your, well, all these things, which is really what the narrative of his tale is about.
Yeah.
They're all embedded. But within education, how do you ask that question?
Yeah.
Where does that sit? Do we have to go to the psychology class? Is that the coaching class? Oh, if we do it here, is it part of what we do? Who does that?
Yeah.
But these are all really important things they need to know to begin to understand. So when they talk to the actors, to be able to relate to the actors on a human level for within themselves, and then they discover their own themes and their own ideas from that, which is really they'd get in life.
Yeah. So do you think that that's the sort of the reading and the sort of access to films and watching and all of that, that does feed into the craft though, to a certain extent, doesn't it?
I remember when my mum was telling my son once, she said, oh my God, Nick, you would do all day long, 15 hours of watch films, oh my God, that boy did nothing else. And I was, before, your parents say that, you feel kind of ashamed, but I put that as a badge of honour, because that's my time. The craft is learned through the making, but craft is also learned through the understanding. And you have to put the hours in. You have to put the hours in not only to learn how to edit, but how do you learn how to edit? So right now, in the old days, when you did film, you had to literally cut it, you had to feel it and hang it and put it up. You'd have to make decisions about the texture of it. When you did 3 machine editing, you had to be very careful, because if you punched a hole in your black, you had to start all over again the process. Everything's digital, it's more conceptual, everything goes on the timeline first of all. So where you had editing, where you had time to sit back and think about the cut and think about how you're telling the story and really think about it. And so many people I know would do paper edits. Okay, they have something which you call paper edit, which is you get something on paper and just lie it on the desk. So how each scene should work.
Yeah.
Each frame next to it. And when you go to watch the older filmmakers, whether it's Walter Mercer or other people, you'll notice behind them, they'll have every frame on a wall, on a board behind them, like a storyboard. Right, it's like, so they'll arrange it. So they always do a mental paper cut first, giving yourself the time to think about the material, to spend time with the material before you cut it. In the process, we cut it, and then we're supposed to reflect upon it. It's much more difficult to do because the decisions have already been made. And once you've made a decision on the timeline, people don't tend to really go back and recut it again.
Yeah. Well, it's much more labour intensive, time intensive.
Yeah, but it needs to be, because it's craft. You've got to pay. That helps you put the hours in. When you watch the material, it allows you to then put the time in to watch difficult things you have to watch 3 days in order to complete it. It's a process. You allow yourself that time to do it. Kids don't do that. And the institutions will follow, because they'll say, well, we've got Netflix.
Yeah.
And I'll say, you've got Netflix, but you won't have a Bergman film on Netflix.
Yeah.
Sometimes you will, depending if they take them in.
Sometimes things are hard. They're difficult to watch. They might be somewhat boring if you're used to the fast pace of what we have in our contemporary lives. And the same goes with reading. I think sometimes things that we need to read are very difficult. I don't know if you have any words to say about reading through challenge or watching through challenge, and what kind of skills that might take, or what kind of advice you might give for.
Well, to be fair to everyone, it's very difficult to read now. And one way it's difficult to read now is because you have to commit yourself to it.
Yeah.
All right? So you've got to commit yourself to come to the library. You've got to commit yourself to actually search for it. You've got to commit yourself to go over to the shelf. You've got to commit yourself to pick the book up, and you've got to commit yourself to read it.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, in a lot of young folks, Generation Z, and definitely millennials, don't want to commit themselves to anything. Okay, less and less, because their brains and minds are all over the place looking at so many different things. And a book is a discipline in itself, because when you get the book, you sit down with it, you have to open it up, you have to spend time with it, you go through the index, you have to read. So you have to spend time with it. So that's a commitment. So it's a commitment to read. And if I'm not committing to do other things, suddenly you expect me to commit to read. I'm not sure if I'm going to kind of do that. It's hard to get that. I mean, I run screenings, and I run screenings, you know, my own time here on a Friday, whatever. And the first couple of weeks will be great, and then after a while, you just get you and the two cinephiles, and if they get ill that week, then it's just you, right? Yeah. And it's because there's an element of commitment to passion. They're not passionate about it. Okay, and you say, oh, well, let's make them passionate. Well, I don't know. I don't know if you can make them passionate.
Interesting.
You can introduce them into a world, but I don't think if you can make them passionate about it. I think they're desensitized in lots of different things, and I think they're desensitized to that within education. I think outside of the building, I don't know, maybe it's very different.
I think you and I have both admitted that our concentration skills have gone down, and but you talked about some tips and tricks you have for making yourself read every day, because you have a reading practice.
Yes.
I hope you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Basically, when I get up in the morning, where I know, because I'm a morning person, so I know my brain is most alert, so I think, so I just spend an hour reading. So I grab a book that I want to read, and I spend 1 hour reading that particular time period. And then when the hour's up, I'll stop and do something else. I'll do smaller scale reading in different places, but that will be like a dedicated focus. Like if I sit down to watch like a television serial episode, I'll treat it in the same way. I'm sitting down and I'm going to read this, and that's what I'm going to read.
Yeah.
And that's how I'll do it.
Without multitasking, or you know, the phone's off, everything's off, no social media, nothing, no. Yeah, and I think that is something to think about, that actually an hour isn't that long compared to, we've got 24 of them in a day, and that setting aside a time when you know you're most alert is really good, and it's amazing how much reading you can get done in that amount of time, or the quality of the reading, right? And because I think sometimes it takes longer to read certain things.
It does. Yes.
If it has ontology in the title,
it does. Yes,
it
does.
Yes.
But I also think that it's something to do with what our relationship to books are, and that's very important, and how books are used when we're younger, and how those books, what our relationship is as we're children towards books. It's the relationship between the students and the library. Yeah. Now, we bought a lot of DVDs of films over the years, purposefully here, to try to get them in the building so they can choose it. And there's not a lecture that doesn't go by where I say to them, I screen something, and they go, oh, that's great, where is it? And I say, it's in the library, purposefully. So I only screen films I know we actually have. But it's still not enough to get them in the library. Yeah. It's the experience of being in here. The experience of them being in here is to get material in order to write an assignment that they don't really want to write, that they may have difficulty with, and they've got to complete it, and it's an arduous task. That's why they're in the building, in order to get books to do that. So it's just this horrible space that they've got to, that they've got to be in, rather than being a really enthusiastic, look at the different kinds of films, look at the different kinds of things I can learn. And I don't know if whether it's the setup, was it the range, I don't know yet, because we struggled in the past to try to get more painting books, the coffee table books here. And that was always frowned upon for your predecessors. It was frowned upon because, not through them, but because of Murray, because even if you bought the book, it'd end up at Murray, it wouldn't end up here because of how it was catalogued. So we don't have an arty environment here. No. So we don't have a place where you could just kind of come in and have these coffee table books and just flick through quickly and go. There's nothing of that space here. Yeah. It's very formal. It's like, I come here and get my book on education, I come here and get my book on history, that's fine. Yeah. But these are different kinds of students. So how do we have that environment where they can not even Murray has that anymore.
Upstairs,
You
yeah,
know.
there's the bit upstairs where you can
Yeah.
go in the art
I'll tell you who
yeah.
did have it though.
Yeah.
Ashburn had it. Ashburn House. When we used to have Ashburn House,
Oh, okay.
that
It's
library,
before my time.
that library over there was my favourite library.
Yeah.
Yeah, they always let you go over on the amount of books you were borrowing, right? But it was my favourite. It was chilled. It was laid back.
Yeah.
It was all in one area, so the students could go from downstairs to upstairs, and that's where it was. And it was loads of students were always in there. There was more students probably looking at art books in that building
Yeah.
than there is now in Murray. You know, and again, as we talked about before, it's what's the effect in the experience
Yeah.
that you wish the student to have,
Yeah.
and that's clear. So the art student needs a particular kind of experience, but what the institution seems to be doing is streamlining all its experiences into one,
Yeah.
and that's a problem.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that sort of student experience and the sort of that feeling of walking in and feeling like it's yours.
Yes.
This is my library. It's something we try really hard to do with probably more or less impact. But what I try and do is make sure that I give tours from me and during induction for all the students, so that they have that moment of coming across the barrier. Some of them will have never spent much time in the library, and I think it's really important that they are led through and shown all the places, all the doors they can open, and look into all the spaces and see how the books are arranged, and so that they know that it's theirs. And I tell them over and over again, this is your library, this is not my library, this is your place, this is your space, your voice is important. And just so that they get that message and they actually come through the building, because I do feel sad when third year or even a master's students will very proudly tell me, I've never been in the library.
Yeah.
And they say, say like a little bit naughty, a little bit cheeky, but it's quite a little bit of pride as well. And I think it's heartbreaking that they would think that they wouldn't need the resources that we have. Because
I don't think that, although the tours are great,
yeah,
I don't think those tours help. I
breaking
think what would help would be rooms like this that you're allowed to use. Well, I know we can book them, but there's sometimes a massive waiting list. But say, particularly for first year students within the first semester, to have some classes that could be in a space like this.
Yeah.
So they could be in the building in a space like this, and in the middle of the session we break up the session for a little bit, because they could go and get tea and coffee, come back in. They used to, but we have to get something from downstairs. They have to get it, find it, in order to come back up, in order for the whole thing to progress further.
To discuss. But I like the idea actually of having, that recreating a little bit of that feeling of your own library, where you could flick through, where things could be out and not just, that all the covers closed on the shelves.
Yes.
Big for art, and not just in Murray, not just for our art students, but for our film students as well, to show them and maybe convince them what's available to them in these larger, more visually appealing, less texty books.
Yeah, but the idea is what's they're going to be their experience when they come in here.
Yeah.
Their experiences, but if they know their experience from the beginning of the first year, so we've done a couple of classes there. Oh, we know this person. Oh, we know we can get it from here. There's a rootedness, and they like to use what they call it again. When I forgot the term. There's that term that we're silos. Oh my goodness, they love that word. Everybody loves that word, silos. But the university talks a lot about silos, but it supports the silos. It doesn't want to say that it does, but it does, because we all do everything over in one building. I mean, I tried. I took a whole group over
and they screamed, didn't
to
they?
the gateway, and they made noise. But that would have given. But it also gave them great access to the drama students, access to other students, which they thoroughly appreciated.
Absolutely, they always talk about how they want to be able to talk to the drama students.
And they did.
Yeah.
And one of the films that the user drama students want is now nominated for an RTS that's up there this year, and that all came from there. But that's all gone. That's all kind of forgotten. But what needs to be the place is to kind of get them out there, and then we're into Murray. To look at these books, or we have a space here where some of the books arrived here, so they can come into.
I can bring them over.
Well, even like a space like this, like we organise 2 or 3 weeks, they come in and it's deliberately looking at light in a certain way, and boom, here are the books, and you go look for this and make notes and take your own photo. But we've got the class
and make
going.
It visually appealing as well.
Absolutely.
Multimedia,
Absolutely.
not just flat, not just book after book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then that gives them a different kind of experience from year 1, and then wherever we take it from there. We take it from there.
Oh, let's do that.
Well, I'm happy to do that. I've actually and that connection with the film is difficult. The connection between the filmmaker and art, the filmmaker in all processes, whether you're production design, camera, whatever, director, that link between art and film is something that there's a gap appearing, huge gap appearing. And that would be my criticism of film studies. That would be my criticism of film studies. When you look at film studies, right, and I've looked at the books of film studies, geez, it's just like an industry. As a filmmaker, that's just like an industry that has nothing. There's no connect. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them have nothing to kind of do, and they're not a gateway in towards something else. So something like emotions in film, which you think fantastic emotions in film. So we've got like 5 books downstairs on emotions in film, or emotions and narrative structure. What's a way in? There's nothing really within those books to kind of give you a way in. Now, if you're interested in the topic area and you've been researching it and that's what you're into and you want to decipher that and then teach students, that's wonderful. But if I'm a young student filmmaker and I've seen the title and I want to deal with it, boom, this is just like Greek all of a sudden. Yeah, so there's a real kind of difficulty on how to bridge it, and you'll be surprised how many of the students do not bridge between the film studies and the filmmaking. Yeah. They don't bridge the gap between the two. Yeah. Maybe.
Again, it's that question of consumption versus craft.